and welcome back. Today I want to talk about an album that I have been after for quite a while. Finally managed to get hold of a copy of it. This is from a US band who are quite difficult to get hold of physical copies, and especially vinyl, of their work anywhere else. This is the band He Is Legend and their 2019 album White Bat. Absolutely banger album. This is their 6th full-length release, and I think, broadly speaking, most of their work is pretty top-notch, but they're a band that kind of managed to always reinvent themselves in a way while still being very true to their sound. It's a really, really excellent dynamic, and I think a lot of it comes down to the sort of main sort of components of the band, particularly vocals and guitar in Shyla Kroom and Adam Tambouz. You also have bass and drums picked up by Matty Williams and Jesse Shelley, respectively. But the sort of counterplay of Shyla Kroom and Adam Tambouz on vocals and guitar, I think it's like a songwriting dynamic duo that so few bands seem to ever get, and they are so perfectly sort of in tune with how a song should come together. Like I don't know what their sort of songwriting process is like, but the way that their music throughout the years has kind of changed energy, but you can still very much tell it's them. The writing and the riffage and the lyrical style is so characteristic, but so interesting every single time they release something new. And this album in particular really like exemplifies that. It's like a top-notch example of their work. So as I say, 6th album. They currently have 7 albums at the moment, with 2022's Endless Hallway finishing out the ranks currently. This one really, for me, is probably the one that I've listened to the most. Not necessarily my favourite. I think across all of their albums I couldn't really pick a specific favourite, but I think this one, just like by virtue of the time that it came out, you know, it was out in 2019. Less than a year after that we had the pandemic, and at that point I sort of ended up just listening to a lot of music. Obviously before I got the physical copy, I listened to it a lot digitally, but this, like, it being a sort of rock record, it kind of lends itself quite nicely to being in a physical copy anyway. I think it kind of has that slightly classic vibe to it, which I think it just kind of fits really nicely. As I say, like, music-wise, they are, I suppose you could characterise them as like metalcore, but it doesn't make sense to really call them that. Some people I've heard call them post-hardcore. Some people have said southern rock. Some people have said like hard rock and just like general metal. And I think it all kind of like fits and it makes sense in a way, but like they are very, very unique, and there are very few bands that I think come close to this. Other bands that you like would potentially have heard of that kind of exude a bit of this vibe would be bands like Maylene and the Sons of Disaster, but that's very much leaning into the sort of southern rock vibe. And then you've got like bands like Every Time I Die, who kind of have the similar sort of energy, but a lot more aggressive in their approach. And obviously now, like, you know, they're no more. But yeah, this album, as I say, I listened to it so much, and I really want to talk about like the standout tracks on here, especially, which, to be honest, most of them are standout tracks. Like, it's such a solid back-to-back album where like you don't really have any tracks that kind of bore you or anything. It's very well laid out, and like the production and everything kind of really sells it as well. But straight in with the title track, White Bat, such an excellent song. It's got this like dissonant guitar riff at the beginning, and then like just a hugely heavy but very simple riff to kind of bring things in, and then you get this such a cool. This is quite a southern sounding piece, like a weird little kind of widdly bit almost, and Shyla Kroom's vocals. I've spoken about it before. I covered their first album during our top 20 playlist, years ago at this point. But his vocal style and also his lyrical style he has this very pantomime quality about it. He's almost like takes on a persona when he does a song, it feels. And like, I love how he very often seems to play a character when he's singing from like the perspective of a complete dirtbag. Like, he's always got this like weird sort of like self-deprecating, like almost like weirdly like diplomatic, like very honest and sort of admitting of his own faults in a way. But like, as I say, I think a lot of it is from a perspective of a character, and later on in the album especially that really shines. So yeah, White Bat, the thing that I really like about White Bat especially, and it's not something that wasn't present on the previous album, but on White Bat especially, like the end of the track has some fantastic like growled, heavy, like low growl vocals, which was one of the things when I first started listening to He Is Legend in the early 2000s, was one of the first things that like really attracted me to them, because at the time I hadn't really heard anything like that, and it was kind of a turn off at the when I very first heard it, but it was one of those things that really grew on me. And now, as I mentioned like in my last video, like heavy vocals and scream vocals very much have their place in any music. But yeah, the end of that track with the sort of heavy growled vocals, like just hits so hard. And next up, you've got Burn All Your Rock Records. This is like just a pure classic rock track. It sounds so good in a modern perspective, but it's got like it's just this really kind of oozes soul. It's just like loads of swagger to it. Really excellent. And as I say, like the production, the modern sound of it, the whole album is mixed by Adam Getgood, who I've mentioned time and time again on here because he's done so much of the work that I listen to. And the sort of punchiness of his sort of drum sounds that he tends to kind of create really lend itself well to what is quite an authentic rock sounding track, but brings it up to speed with the modern era. The two tracks in particular that I think everyone should check out, they're on the sort of latter half of the album, Uncanny Valley and The Interloper. I kind of sort of treat them as like a 2-for-1 deal. Like, you sort of almost have to listen to one and then the other every time you want to listen to either of them. So Uncanny Valley, a very weird sort of track that kind of feels it's quite stalkerish, and I think that's sort of an element that kind of goes throughout the album. The whole album feels as if it's written about like a stalker or a murderer or something like that, or stalkers and murderers plural. And yeah, that track in particular is so creepy. The guitar riff, or it's not even a riff really, it's just a guitar line. You've got sort of an excellent amount of kind of ambience sitting in the background, and there's like weird little kind of like delay bits and layering that is so fantastic. And that for me is a kind of real characteristic of theirs is the guitar layering, where they almost take on like a synth like quality. They're textural rather than rhythmic or melody based. It's building an atmosphere, and a track like that where it is so creepy, and the name Uncanny Valley as well, like it's like spot on. And then, as I say, that leads into The Interloper, which is like very overtly is about like a kidnapper or a murderer, or one then the other, I guess. It's like you build up from Uncanny Valley being this essentially just entirely down-tempo track, which doesn't really have any kind of heaviness or guitar riffage per se, and then The Interloper brings that mood in, and then slowly builds up to sort of like complete this sort of story almost of a kidnapping or a murder or something like that. And that is where the sort of pantomiminess, I think, really like absolutely shines. It's so theatrical. It's so evocative of a narrative. A lot of other vocalists like don't seem to have anywhere near the level of kind of creative input on that aspect. You know, you get a lot of vocalists who will talk about something that is important to them, absolutely, and they will convey a message, but the way messages are conveyed with this, it's, you know, it's pure storytelling. It's like the most like art form of the art form, if that makes sense. So yeah, Uncanny Valley and The Interloper, like absolute, they are stellar tracks, and I think it's kind of a shame they weren't released as some sort of a single kind of combination, because Whitebat, Burn All Your Rock Records, they were both released as singles. And, you know, I guess it makes sense. You know, you kind of need to go for the mass appeal for singles, but those two tracks are just so good, the Uncanny Valley and Interloper. The final track that I really want to highlight is Boogie Woman, which is the final song on the album, and I think is based on this album and the two that came previous to it, I think is another part of a trilogy of songs like they had on the first three albums with their China White series, and this feels like the sort of a continuation of that again. So just to sort of briefly talk about it, the China White trilogy is on the first three albums is a series of songs that essentially tell this story of like a gardener, and he's sort of like, from what I can gather, it's like a love of his plants, like a genuine like love, rather than like I love plants, like he is in love with his plants. And it's a very, very sort of again pantomime-y, weird sort of, it's got criminal sort of vibes to it. And the three albums that came after, which were Heavy Fruit, Few, and then this album, the final tracks on each of them have had sort of like similar sort of thematic vibes to them. So I feel like they have, this is just a continuation of that series under a different name. And Boogie Woman is sort of this story about like essentially like resurrecting a woman in the desert. I think it's, you know, some of the lyrics are quite veiled and they're not 100% giving it away, but it's got a very kind of Rob Zombie quality to it. It's sort of very similar to Living Dead Girl in terms of like the vocals and the or the lyricism, I should say. And the riff itself, without a shadow of a doubt, like one of the best metal riffs I've ever heard. Particularly the tuning of it. I'm a big sucker for guitar tunings and like nerding out and that sort of stuff. And they use a tuning that's it's a tuning they've used for a long time, but it's a tuning that I first became aware of from the band Mastodon, where you essentially take a standard tune guitar, take it all the way down a step, so you're in sort of D standard, and then you take the lowest D and you tune that all the way down to an A. So you kind of have this sort of pseudo 7-string approach, sort of, you know, you're almost in the same tuning as Korn, just sans your sort of second lowest string. But the approach to writing a riff on a 6-string versus a 7-string is so different that it rewires your brain. And I think that's something that I love about guitar-based music in particular. You can almost get into the mind of the person who wrote it and how they sort of approached it from particular tunings and how that influenced their decisions. And this one in particular, it's just like, it makes such great use of that tuning. It's such a heavy track while still having like funk and groove. And it's the sort of thing that, like, if you play guitar, I highly recommend learning the riff and learning the song as a whole, because it's just such fun to play. And it's like a good little workout as well for guitarists. It just like so excellent. As I say, the whole album sounds phenomenal. The presentation of this is really, really nice. It's quite a simple presentation, but I've always loved their artwork across every single album they do. But this is just a tiny little detail. But you've got the embossed bits and pieces there, and I love that. And you've got these sort of ransom note style bits and pieces on the back for the track titles. And as for the insert, it is kind of a gatefold type job, but there's nothing really in there. You just get a singular quote, which I like. I sometimes think we must all be mad, and that we shall wake to sanity in straight waistcoats. And yeah, then you get a insert as well, which has all of the lyrics of all the tracks sort of scrawled out by hand. It's very, very evocative of that kind of like mad serial killer kind of vibe, which I just think is such a cool presentation. And you know, the hand drawn bits and pieces as well, and then some like artwork in the middle, very creepy, weird sort of things. Love that. I feel like that piece in the middle is like a balaclava almost. The head in the middle there. That, at least to me, is what it seems to represent. And yeah, more of the same at the end. You've just got your sort of thank you notes and stuff on the last page. As for the vinyl itself, it's just a standard black vinyl, but I do really like the label itself. Actually, you've got more artwork on the label, which I think just looks really nice. And you know, just a simple presentation, but it comes across really well. So yeah, big fan of that as an all-in-one package. As I say, they're difficult to get hold of, especially in the UK. They tend to get pretty limited pressings, and they do occasionally get repressed. Like at the moment, their third album, It Hates You, is sort of up for pre-order for a repress, which I will try and get a hold of, even though the import fees are going to be immense. But if you do find a copy like this, I think is an excellent pickup. As I say, like the kind of rockiness of it really does sit well as a physical release. It just kind of, it works. It's got that sort of classic tang to it, which I think like more heavy music needs to kind of embrace. You know, modern music is too serious sometimes, and this kind of has that sort of, as I said, the theatrics, the almost silliness. It's just kind of, there's fun behind it. It's you can just really get into it and kind of engross yourself in the sort of storytelling that you get with it. And yeah, I think they as a band are just like, they're so they were ahead of their time in the early 2000s, and they're still ahead of their time. Like they're one of the best bands within the scene, like without a shadow of a doubt. And they're so unique, and they have such great like taste for their own music. And I think they're so underappreciated despite that sort of fantastic work that they put out. So I would really like more people to hear about them, and I hope we get many more albums to come, because, you know, judging by the last one, they ain't stopping making the bangers anytime soon. Last album was just as good as this one, and I just hope they keep doing what they're doing, keep creating art, and yeah, hopefully one day we get more repressings and everybody can enjoy it around the world. But yeah, for the time being, that's it. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.